Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. We'll give folks just 30 more seconds and then we'll get started. Okay, great. Let's get going. We have a busy hour with lots of incredible leaders, so let's get started. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining. Thank you for being with us for this virtual side event on the sidelines of CSW 68, From Policy to Practice, SDG 16 and SDG 5, Interlinkages for Inclusive Peace and Development. It's been a very busy week and a half at CSW, so appreciate you taking some time with us. My name is Megan Corrado. I'm the Senior Director for the Alliance for Peacebuilding. For those that don't know AFP, we're a membership organization based in Washington, D.C., with over 200 organizational members working in 181 countries to prevent conflict and build sustainable peace. I'm also the co-chair of the U.S. Civil Society Working Group on WPS, a coalition of over 70 organizations working to advance women, peace, and security agenda in the U.S. and globally. Just an important housekeeping note from the start, we have translated captions available. Please refer to the chat for some detailed directions there. I'd like to give a huge thank you to my partners in coordinating this important event, the TAP Network, the Women for Peace and Gender Equality Initiative, and the Global Network of Women Peacebuilders. And a special thanks to Elena Marmo of the TAP Network, who spearheaded all of the very intense logistics to make today happen. So thank you, Elena. So why this topic? Why today? The world continues to experience record-breaking violent conflict across the globe. The impacts of these conflicts are being compounded by climate change, democratic backsliding, food insecurity, and humanitarian need. And while all conflicts are unique, they all have one common characteristic, that women and girls are disproportionately harmed. And this harm comes in many forms, directly from things like attacks on communities or conflict-related sexual violence, to displacement, lack of food and access to healthcare, widowhood, loss of education and livelihood, and of course, trauma. And although the state of the world is dire, I remain hopeful. I am hopeful because half of this world is made up of women. And when women are involved in societal decision-making, peace processes, and institutions, states are more peaceful and stable. Every day, women in homes, communities, and countries are demonstrating their power as agents of change and peace. And I'm so thankful that we have a number of incredibly inspiring women joining us today for this discussion. Here, we seek to highlight the ways gender equality, the aim of SDG 5, and sustainable peace and justice, the aim of SDG 16, are inextricably linked. You cannot create durable peace when you exclude half the population, particularly given their unique roles and experiences during violence and conflict. And so while it is important to think about these two SDGs as essential to achieve each other, I'd argue that SDG 5 and SDG 16 should be cross-cutting across all the SDGs. We'll never eliminate poverty and hunger, ensure quality education, healthcare for all, or adequately address the climate crisis if we cannot eradicate conflict and secure women's game-changing role in these efforts. Today, we issue a call to action to integrate the aims of gender equality and peace in all efforts to achieve all of the SDGs. So, to explore what this looks like in practice, I am very delighted to turn it over to our distinguished speakers. And first up, it is my honor to introduce Dr. Izada Mahoy, Minister of Gender and Children's Affairs in Sierra Leone. Thank you so much for joining us, Minister. Over to you.
Thank you so much. And I appreciate and feel elated that I'm given the opportunity to talk in this all-important event. You know, discussing the Women, Peace and Security agenda has been one of the greatest things I love doing in my life. So today I'm happy to share my experience with you. Esteemed panelists, distinguished guests, I bring you greetings from the government of Sierra Leone and the women's movement in Sierra Leone generally. I am particularly honored to share a panel with these eminent colleagues whose work around women, peace, and security is globally acknowledged. On behalf of the government of Sierra Leone, I want to extend my hearty gratitude again and appreciation to the organizers for giving me the opportunity to share my country's experience in advancing gender equality in the context of global women, peace, and security agenda. Our efforts at promoting the Women, Peace and Security agenda are well articulated in the country's national plans for the implementation of the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security. In 2009, Sierra Leone became the fourth country in West Africa and seventh in Africa to develop a national action plan for the full implementation of the UN Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security, and it was called the SILNAP 1. We have recently completed implementation of the UN Peace and Security Council National Action Plan 2, and in the process of finalizing the development of the third generation of the SILNAP. Our National Action Plan are always aligned with global frameworks, including SDGs 5 and 16, CEDAW, and the national priorities such as the medium-term national development plans and the National Gender Strategic Plan, among others. Distinguished panelists, the Women, Peace and Security agenda is something that we as a country have taken very seriously, and we prioritize it. This is why I'm giving you the strategies that we have discussed so far, we have done so far in our country. First, we have adopted the WPS policies, strategies, and institutional mechanisms in security sector institutions. The Republic of Sierra Leone Armed Forces, the Sierra Leone Police, the Office of National Security, and other SSIs have adopted policies, strategies, and mechanisms for promoting WPS. For instance, the Republic of Sierra Leone Armed Forces adopted gender equal opportunities, fraternizing, and sexual harassment policies. A gender directorate was also established with 72 designated gender focal persons. The Sierra Leone Police has also adopted gender mainstreaming, sexual exploitation and abuse and harassment policies, and established a gender directorate and regional and divisional gender focal persons in all 36 police divisions in the country. The Office of National Security also formulated a gender policy that inter alia seeks to mainstream gender perspective throughout the ONS and the security sector. Today, they have established a gender unit, even though that unit is not very much functional, but there is a gender focal point who is a woman. The challenges remain. Second, integration of WPS indicators into national conflict early warning and early response mechanisms. The Office of National Security has decentralized security committees established by National Security and Central Intelligence Act in 2002. The committees inter alia provided early warnings and early response to all issues of national concern, including gender-based violence, sexual harassment and intimidation, rape, domestic violence, intimidation by secret societies, sex for grades, early or forceful marriage, and many others. Third, we've seen the strengthening prevention and protection from sexual gender-based violence, which includes the following measures: adoption of national male involvement strategy for SGB prevention, which was adopted in 2020. There is a toll-free line on rape, which is the 116, launched in 2020 as well. We have established 7 one-stop centers in 7 districts to provide comprehensive SGB response services. We have adopted a national sexual gender-based violence response strategy and sexual offense model court established in 2020 to fast-track cases of SGBV. And we have set up a residential task force on rape and sexual violence. We also established the SGBV case management system to improve the quality of care for SGBV survivors. And we have introduced what we call the GVB IMS Plus in 4 districts, with plans to expand this year in additional districts. We, as a ministry, we have reviewed the gender-based violence referral pathway to integrate school-related incidents of GVB, and developed the GVB referral pathway to complementary systems to SGBV case management on GVB IMS Plus. Another aspect is that we have increased participation and representation of women in governance and decision-making, including the security sector institutions. We have seen that in 2022, we passed an act called the Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment Act, which is ensured minimum 30% representation of women in political and public decision-making bodies. We have got at least 30% elected ordinary members of parliament. In the last parliament, we had 18 women. In this parliament, we have 42. We've seen an increase in that. And also for cabinet ministers, we've got 34.5 cabinet ministers and deputy ministers, 33%. We've got some 41% elected mayor, chairperson, and 34 elected councillors and local council. And the Sierra Leone Police has 23 and Republic of Sierra Leone Armed Forces has 13% female. There's a huge challenge there. And we tend to see that we work together with the security forces and every other decision-making body to include women, especially in enhancing goal 5 and 6, so that we meet the sets for 2030. We are mindful of the critical need for building partnership. And this is why today I'm participating in this particular conference, so that we'll be able to talk about things or issues that will help improve the status of women in Sierra Leone, especially when it has to do the women, peace and security agenda. I want to thank you for your attention and for also giving me the opportunity to be able to bring out this message to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Minister, for taking some time with us this morning. I know you have a busy itinerary in New York around CSW, but we're just so pleased to have spent some time with you, hear about the incredible progress you are spearheading, and we're just so thankful for your leadership. So now we'll turn to our panel. I'll introduce them all three very quickly, and then we'll leave some time for Q&A as well. So it is my pleasure to introduce you to Hira Amjad. She is the Cora Weiss Peacebuilding Fellow at the Global Network of Women Peacebuilders and Executive Director of the Das-Tak Foundation in Pakistan. We also have Dr. Majisola Akinsana. She is the Executive Director of Women for Peace and Gender Equality Initiative. And last but not least, we have Isabella Marin. She's a gender specialist with the Ideas for Peace Foundation in Colombia. So I asked all three of our speakers to come prepared with some overarching responses to these three questions. We know civil society organizations and actors around the world are working to implement the SDGs, particularly SDG 16 and SDG 5. What does this look like in practice to make progress towards achieving these two? How are you filling the gaps left by your governments at the national, subnational, and local levels? And what best practices and lessons learned from your experience can be scaled into other contexts? So thank you again for being with us. Hira, over to you.
Thank you so much. And first of all, I want to acknowledge the efforts in terms of organizing this very important webinar that talks about the synergy between Sustainable Development Goal 16 and Sustainable Development Goal 5. And as we all know that SDG 16 talks about peace, justice, and strong institutions, and it highlights the need for inclusive societies, for sustainable development and access for justice for all, and for building effective and accountable and inclusive structures to fight corruption at all levels to ensure representation. And similarly, Sustainable Development Goal 5 talks about the gender equality and elimination of all forms of violence and discrimination against women. So we have to see that how there is a very strong synergy between SDG 5 and SDG 16. And as I am carrying two hats into this conversation where I'm representing GNWP and my organization, Das-Tak Foundation as well. So I'm going to very quickly talk about two things here, that it's very pertinent that we look at the Agenda 2030 and how it talks about the SDG 5 and SDG 16 in all its inclusivity and actuality, where if we look at how we are dealing with poly crisis at the moment globally, and I have seen a lot of people during CSW talk about that if crises multiply threats, women are solution multipliers. They have the capacity and the power and the synergy to bring multiple inclusive perspectives to the table, and they have the potential to bring in that much needed inclusivity in terms of resolution of conflicts. And if we analyze the current conversations that are happening within the 2030 agenda, we would come to see that how the SDG 16 does not really talk about the gender aspect of it, and how SDG 5 does not talk about how the conflict impacts gender. So the language that is used within these documents on an international level is extremely important, and that's where the role of civil society comes in. Like GNWP has published various policy documents, and as a civil society leader from Pakistan, we continue to advocate for different instruments at national level. For instance, Gender Action Plan, Climate Gender Action Plan, to not just mainstream the experiences that women are having at the localized level, but to make their stories part of the conversation as well. One other important aspect that I want to bring into this conversation is that I understand when we sit at these forums, we sit at these platforms, we look at it from a very technical perspective, from a very, like the language that we use, it's very jarring for somebody who is a grassroots leader like me. So I want to bring in the aspect of human-centered design and storytelling into these spaces as well, where we need to humanize these conversations, where we need to personalize these conflicts and make them bring those women to the table. That's what we are trying to do through GNWP and through my organization in Pakistan as well. We are bringing in stories from the grassroots level, where leaders, member states, UN entities and agencies can directly interact with these women who are at the heart of these situations and these places. I just want to give one quick example here. Obviously, we all know that WPS agenda is slowly and gradually moving forward, and we have seen a lot of national action plans in the coming years. But since this is also the CSW of financing, we can also talk about how a lot of these documents do not come attached with budgets. And there is a strong need to push for financing in these spaces. That, okay, I understand that we need to have these documents, but we need to put our money where our mouth is as well. The member states, different UN entities, global agencies, aid agencies need to invest in local women leadership so that it's more inclusive, it's more representative of what's happening at the grassroots level. And that's where the leadership comes in terms of the synergy between SDG 16 and SDG 5. In the respective time, I'm just going to give one quick example from Pakistan. We have been trying to push for a gender action plan for as long as I can remember, but we weren't able to do that. So we got a little bit creative and we brought in the aspect of climate. And now we have a climate gender action plan in Pakistan, where we're able to highlight how climate is disproportionately impacting young girls and women. And now gender is part of the national discourse. So as civil society leaders, we also have to become a little bit creative as to how we can bring these conversations to the table and navigate these challenges. Towards the end, the only recommendation, I think the most important recommendation that I have as of now is financing. Inclusive, flexible, grassroots, and building those trust and bridges with civil society leaders is the way forward in terms of advancing SDG 5, 16, and looking at other synergies between different sustainable development goals as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kira. I love everything you just said. That was incredible. Women are solution multipliers. Scream that from the rooftops because it is the truth. And absolutely just so appreciative of your efforts to center local voices and the narratives and storytelling. It's such a challenge, I think, for the peace building field in particular, something we're trying to address at AFP. How do we make our stories really clear to folks that aren't in, the very technical, wonky space that we all live in? And yeah, just making sure we gender budget. So incredibly important. When you invest in local women, it goes so much further than you could ever imagine. So just greatly appreciative of your comments. Now I'd like to turn it over to Moji Sola. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me, and for the last two speakers, that's a great work you're doing over there. In Nigeria, working with, I'm the Executive Director, Women for Peace and Gender Equality Initiative, and part of our work is committing, supporting, and implementing the SDG 16 at subnational level. at national and regional level. So we've come from a lot of coalition building since 2015, 2016 to make sure that civil society have enough capacity to actually run the implementation of SDG and to support governments in what they are doing. But we have a lot of setbacks after COVID-19 and the civic space that is shrinking in our region. But then we keep on pushing for progress at the subnational level to actually face one thing at a time, and gradually we are getting there. So in WOPEGEE, our key priority is transition and areas for investment that this commitment we address, which includes investment in women and girls in order to make digital transformation work for everyone in order to reduce violence against women and girls. We also advocate, we mobilize and strengthen a multi-stakeholder partnership at that point. So the multi-stakeholder partnership in this coalition building has been a great lesson for us. It's like a model where we bring together the academia, the media, the private sector, and all the informal sector, especially artisans at the grassroots level, to have ownership, to drive their own agency in terms of making sure that we implement SDG at subnational level. And that has been working because this academia, strengthen other stakeholders in that cluster to make sure that we have research and documentation. And that's research, producing the research have pushed us to have a key advocacy tool to government for a reason for them to speed up the implementation of SDG 16 and SDG 5. Presently now, we are working now on a costed action plan, which is supported by AWDF. It's a project, 3-year project in Ogun State, where we make sure that the costed action plan will support the violence against person prohibition law to make sure that women and girls have access to law and justice in terms of SGBV, which is a critical one. But we are making a lot of inroads with that. Also, we support advocacy, strengthen advocacy and support advocacy for girls in particular in public schools. After COVID, we have pockets of violence, especially in kidnapping girls in schools in Nigeria, and the Fulani cattle others conflict. We are able to make some simple research and look at what is actually the roots, the driving force of all this kidnapping and pocket of violence that is happening in public secondary school. So we are able to make the research together and put it forward to the government at the subnational level to make sure that all the schools are built in a safe place. And as we speak now, there is a policy about safe school in Nigeria that have been in place. And so that's a good critical one. And we are even pushing forward all the survivors of violence against women to come out to lead the advocacy strategy where they can talk and give us the human angle story about how they are affected and what actually they want. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mojisola. Appreciate everything you do every day. You're such an incredible leader. I loved a couple of things you said. The need for the coalitions of very diverse folks, women, academics, the private sector, so critical because states have not adequately invested in the WPS agenda or gender equality overall. How do we leverage and mobilize these other actors that can invest in women? So absolutely critical point. And thanks as well for highlighting the issue of research and how it's so vital to ensure that we have evidence-based policy. We know when women are involved in peace processes, they're more, peace agreements are more durable. We know that when there's less violence against women, states are more stable and secure. So we have the evidence. We need to keep doing that research and just absolutely critical. So thank you so much as well. Now I'd love to turn it over to Isabella Marin to discuss her work in Colombia. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. Thanks a lot for the invitation. So I'm going first to speak a little bit about the experience of women's participation in the Colombian peace process, in the Havana peace process with FARC guerrilla. So the first thing to say about the achievements of the Colombian peace process in terms of securing women's participation and the inclusion of a gender perspective in the peace agreement, it was that it wasn't given for free. Almost 1 year after the beginning of the peace process, there was only one woman among the main negotiators. And in this context, more than 500 women got together around a platform known as the Summit of Women and Peace to discuss and establish a strategy for the incorporation of the gender perspective in the peace process. This initiative was supported by local and international allies that had key roles in the negotiating table and managed to pressure for the recognition and inclusion of women in Havana. So after this gathering, more women were included among the main negotiators, and the government announced the creation of a gender subcommission. This mechanism was created so that the peace agreement could be reviewed by 6 delegations of representatives from 18 organizations that work for the rights of women and sexual minorities. And the representatives traveled to Havana to present a speech and a document to the members of the gender subcommission. This was the first time that a gender subcommission was installed in a peace process, and the result was the inclusion of 122 gender measures in the final document. So mainly this was the result of the collective and persistent efforts of these women organizations, their strategic networks, and their lobby. And in terms of integrating women in leadership positions, the Havana process is a great example of how women leadership can play key roles in decision-making. However, women holding these positions after that manifested that their leadership was never as visible as men, and that even if important achievements were accomplished, the dynamics during the negotiations were defined by men and held by men's rules, guided by competition and not necessarily listening and dialogue. And women were hardly taken in account in issues still considered as main issues like security and illicit economies. So 8 years after the peace agreement was signed, there are still many challenges in terms of fostering peace from a gender perspective. According to the group that follows the implementation of the gender measures included in the peace agreement, only around 30% have been implemented successfully, and women's representation in politics in general has not improved since the peace agreement. Neither women's condition in conflict areas. So I think that we can learn from the Havana peace process is mainly the importance of having a strong women's movement that is fundamental for all of those achievements, and leaders from all sectors compromise with the UPS agenda. But considering that, what we learn is that considering that the dynamics of politics and their power structures are gendered, they will continue to constrain the advancement of gender measures inside and outside peace processes. So affirmative measures will be insufficient to move toward gender equality if they do not address more deeply those structures that exclude women from decision-making in the first place. Right now, what we are doing from Fundación Ideas para la Paz is that we have been working with the consolidation of a research to action collaborative network with community leaders and grassroots organizations in conflict-affected areas. And through this network, what we do is gather and exchange knowledge and experience, and also strengthen local capacities to build collective solutions on gender inequalities. And currently, the network is formed by more than 160 organizations, mostly women's organizations, with whom we are developing around 20 collective initiatives that promote the transformation of gender norms, relationships, and behaviors. So, for instance, we are working with young people and men in the community and in the public institutions for the recognition and promotion of a more equitable distribution of care responsibilities at home, as well as the promotion of more inclusive forms of leadership, which incorporate other voices and ways of decision-making different from traditional masculinized practices, among other actions. So this process expects to contribute to the implementation of the UPS agenda, specifically by working with key actors engaged in taking gender measures of the peace agreement from policy to practice, but also inviting them to experiment on how gendered politics can be altered in these areas of the country. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Isabella. Appreciate that. Just so important to hear about the lesson of Colombia, because for so often that movement of women that you described, was really held up as an incredible example of WPS in action. But now what? How do we make sure that they are continuously involved in institutions and the implementation of the agreements? So just really critical to hear that experience, and love what you talked about on the policy to action work and working with grassroots organizations. So critical if we are going to truly implement WPS in the long term, because WPS isn't, a one-time achievement. It isn't just having some women represented at the table. It's ongoing, and requires nurturing and sustainable and financing. So thank you for that. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Elena Marmo from TAP Network. We're trying to make this a bit inclusive. So she's going to walk us through a Mentimeter, and then we'll take some questions. So I see some hands popping up. Please do get your questions together, and we'll turn to the crowd in just a few moments. Elena, over to you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Megan. And thank you again to all of our speakers. I think really wonderful insights, and also seeing a clear sort of through line in all of your comments around the importance of really demonstrating work that's happening at the grassroots, subnational, national level, storytelling, but then also the financing to sort of build that evidence-based research, and then in turn sort of connecting all of those conversations to the global level. So quick sort of overview of myself. I'm Elena from the TAP Network. One of the sort of main priorities of the TAP network in the next 2 years or so is our SDG 16 Now campaign. So we're a global civil society campaign to support accelerated action on SDG 16 plus, that plus being all of these interlinkages like we're discussing today. So really thinking about how do we bridge the gap between work that's being done to actualize SDG 16 and global level discussions around the 2030 agenda. So I have a brief Mentimeter. If you haven't completed a Mentimeter before, I'll walk you through it. You can take a look in the chat for a direct link to this this interactive website. I'll share my screen so you can see what it looks like. Within the Mentimeter, you have the option to answer this question in three different short answers. So the question we're posing to everyone today is, in what areas do you think we can strengthen these interlinkages between SDG 5 and SDG 16? We've heard from our speakers pretty clearly some of the different ways in which they may be doing work at the national, subnational level to strengthen these interlinkages, but we're curious from all of your areas of work, what sort of areas do you think these interlinkages can come through more clearly? So we're seeing the responses come in as we speak. Financing and institutions and accountability within those institutions, certainly. So yeah, if you can use the link in the chat, or you can on your mobile device go to menti.com and then put in that code 42940313 to add your comments. So we'll give a moment or so for folks to add their thoughts here. This is helping us kind of pull together a really interesting word cloud, and so you'll see the words that are in a larger size are ones where multiple people have probably indicated that this is a priority or an area to strengthen interlinkages. So we'll give folks a minute or so. Financing, staying strong, which is great. Definitely a through line through all of our comments today. But also seeing capacity building, capacity strengthening, partnership, justice. I know some of our colleagues spoke to justice mechanisms, specifically around gender-based violence. Definitely an area where we can draw really clear connections between SDG 5 and SDG 16. More partnership and partnerships, data, cooperation, I love that financing has come through really clearly. I think particularly pertinent. I know Hira's giving us a thumbs up, but really pertinent with the theme of CSW this year being around financing in the context of the fact that we have the Summit of the Future happening at the global level later this year, but we also have the Financing for Development Conference happening next year. I think this is a really apt time for us to think about how can we as an SDG 16 plus community really work to advocate on behalf of the financing for SDG 16, but also the way in which it intersects with SDG 5. But yeah, thank you all for your responses. We'll keep this sort of going for a little while, so feel free to continue to input. But I think at this point it might be a good opportunity to turn back to Megan to turn it over to any questions that folks might have in the chat, or if you want to raise your hand. I know we also have plenty of follow-up questions for our wonderful speakers as well. So thank you, everybody.
Thanks so much, Elna. Amazing, very, very keen observations from our participants. I think a lot of these issues really jump out and are just really big challenges we're all facing with. So I'd love to maybe just take a moment and hear reflections from each of the panelists on, some of the words and concepts we just saw in the Mentimeter. Financing is really at the heart of moving the gender equality and WPS agendas forward. I think, even in the United States, we fought tooth and nail and mobilized a lot of the words that were used: partnerships, advocacy, capacity building, to ask for more money from our Congress. And even while we have made gains in the last couple of years, it's the language is may. The State Department, USAID duty may provide funding. It's not a shall, it's not required. And so that's a big point we're trying to push for here in the US and everywhere. But we'd just love to maybe go through our list of panelists real quick and then open it up for questions. So here are any reflections on what we saw, or what you heard from the other panelists as well.
Yes, something that has been on my mind throughout the CSW 68 and I have been advocating for as well is that as much as we need financing, we need the funding to be situated within the Global South as well. I just want to give a quick example of there is this fund which is called Women's Fund Asia, and it's based out of our side of the world. It understands the local challenges, the local nuances, so that participatory approach in financing is also really integral in driving the 2030 agenda forward. And I think that is something that needs to be part of the conversation here, where we are kind of more inclusive and participatory and more representative of the target constituencies that we are trying to support and work with. So that's one other reflection and something that I've been trying to advocate for in different spaces. So yeah, that's something that comes to my mind.
Thanks so much. Minister, maybe I see you still online. I'm not sure if you're able to speak. I just wanted to see if you wanted to intervene in reflections, and then I'll turn to Sola. And if no worries.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm having some internet challenge. I think the presenters have done a great deal in terms of letting us know how the WPS agenda is impacting on the lives of women and also the challenges that are being recorded. I just want to say what it takes for us to be able to achieve this agenda, especially goal 16 and 5 in 2030, is for us to work collaboratively and working in partnerships with other institutions, civil society, government, other private and other sectors would be able to enhance our capacity and ability to ensure the agenda is well looked into and also being the focus of our national development. And for instance, our national plan should focus on ensuring that every aspect that has to do with the development, security of women is of utmost concern. For me, I don't see us working well in this particular aspect. Probably also countries should work together, and countries working together on positioning themselves. We should be able to look at those countries that are doing better and learn their experiences, exchange experiences with them to understand how did they do it. Because as we speak, we've seen countries who have gone up to the 5th generation. I think 1 or 2 of them. We have seen some countries on the 4th generation, and still we have countries that are on the 1st generation of the WPS agenda. We need to know what is going on well in other countries and how we can emulate such ideas so that we will also have the aspect of implementing the agendas successfully in our respective countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Very important. Mojisola, over to you.
Yeah, what we have seen at the subnational level is that most of the time when we wait for government, I'm talking about financing now, when we wait for government to provide this budget on violence against women, on service provider, on shelter, it all goes to the fact that government don't have the political will, especially things that will not bring a sort of incentive back to them. So what we have worked out now is that how can we make sure in the coalition we build, where we have the private sector and other stakeholders, even the informal sector, no matter how small, we can contribute like a trust fund that we can use to support the policy and the laws, especially on violence against persons. And so that is the model we are looking at now. It's going to be a sort of policy, a sort of law that will happen pass at the subnational level to support such a financing method to make sure that we have. But when we look, there was a structure in my own state now where we have, when the insecurity was so high and the government was able to gather, using its own social control to gather private sector to have a security trust fund. So that is the architect we are looking at. If they can do that as men, they could quickly do that. And how can they support women too? Issues that is social issues like that, like a social protection. Although we are driving social protection at one point, but then the issue of financing will also come back. If there is a policy in place and there is no costed action plan, it won't work. Everything will just sit down there and they will be telling you there's no money, there's nothing we can do. So as we are pushing for that policy and advocacy, we are also making sure we costed the price, the budget for all the line items that will come under the implementation of that policy. So we are not just advocating for that policy alone. We are making sure where is the money and where are they going to get that money to make sure that is implemented at subnational level. So we are taxing ourselves that each of us has some social control. We gather influencers like the first ladies as influencers to use their own social circle to mobilize resources like a gender-based trust fund for the state. Thank you.
Thank you, Mojisola. So critical. The need to link law policy to budgets. Absolutely. Isabella, over to you.
So no, in terms of thinking about financing and accountability, that I think the Colombian experience has showed that, there's not always, of course, political will, and particularly to implement the UPS agenda, but we have to take advantage of what it already existed in the country, in terms of institutions, but also all the trajectory of the women's organization. So for instance, all the advances that we achieved in terms of the gender measures included in the peace process, we did it without a national action plan. Actually, the national action plan for the UN resolution was just approved and formulated last year. It will be launched I think this month or the next month. So we have just to take advantage of what is there, and that the women's movement have not rested. They have been working to pressure so that the gender measures were implemented, at least partially. and they still are mobilizing. So for instance, we also realized that we had to take advantage of the local policy to implement the gender measures. So for instance, right now, the local and regional authorities are designing the territorial development plans, which are like the guide, the policy guide of municipalities and in the regional level, so that these authorities can, do all the actions they want to do in their 4-year period. So we realize we have to put that woman's demands in those policy papers that are local and that have existed from many years ago, so that the gender measures of the peace agreement are included in those local policy plans. So yes, I think that the reflection here is just to take advantage of what is already there. And nowadays, for instance, we also have, I think that the leadership of a figure like Francia Marquez as vice president has been very significant in terms of representation of an intersection of identities that have been very poorly represented in decision-making processes in the country. And she has also been very important in committing to guarantee minorities' rights through the newly conformed Ministry of Equality. But this is all like a part of the result of all these fights and these pressures of women's organizations. So we have to work with what is there and try to change politics from inside, but it's all progressive and all step by step.
Thank you all for that. Really appreciate that. There's a couple questions coming in on the Q&A section and on the chat. So I welcome you to respond to any of which jump to your interest, but I'd also love to hear a little bit about, how do we, and it was referenced in the broader chat, obviously the patriarchy is a problem, and patriarchal norms and structural obstacles that have inhibited the world from achieving gender equality and ensuring women are involved in institutions and peace processes and justice mechanisms. So how are you trying to, call in men, promote peaceful masculinities, recognizing that men experience, conflict and crisis in their own unique way. So more than just, building a cadre of allies, how do we buy them in and, stand shoulder to shoulder as we, try to achieve SDG 5 and SDG 16? Maybe Hira, I'll start with you.
Thank you, Megan. So I'm big on, human-centered design and storytelling and humanizing these issues. So I would just like to share a program or a toolkit that we have developed in Pakistan in collaboration with the Swedish Embassy and UN Women Pakistan. And that toolkit breaks down the idea of toxic masculinity, patriarchy, and how men fit into this conversation, where we are not talking about gender-based violence, where we are not talking about how men are the perpetrators and how they are the other gender in that conversation. We're just getting them together in a room and making them talk about love, ego, friendship, sex, marriage, fatherhood, teenage. So these very personal things that are associated with them and their identity, and because of the generational, cultural, social taboos, are one way or the other contributing to these issues that we are trying to address. So we are getting them to talk about, like, for example, just a quick example, there was this conversation that we had with fathers around fatherhood. So there were 12 people in the group, and all of them unanimously said that nobody has ever asked to us what it feels like to be a father. The only thing that we know is that we had this responsibility. One day we didn't have it, and then we woke up and we had this transition into our lives, and we had to manage with it, we had to deal with it. So these are very personal things that later on manifest into extreme forms of violence that we are dealing with on a daily basis in our societies. So just like I can go on and on and on and share a lot of other examples as to how we are doing this work, but I think breaking down those norms and taboos that are connected with the larger manifestation of gender-based violence and how men fit into this conversation is really important. One other thing I often, whenever we have this International Women's Day, we have this, plethora of men come around and challenge us what we are doing. So I asked them, are you familiar with Men's International Day? How are you celebrating that? So trying to be more inclusive in our conversations, maybe towards them, and helping them understand that they are the stakeholders. They are not, just part of the problem, I think is something that can shift the narrative a little bit. From our context in Pakistan, that's something that we are doing, and we are seeing positive results. Thank you.
Thanks, Hira. And I think that really speaks to what you said earlier about human-centered storytelling and approaches, because we're all humans at the end of the day with unique experiences. And I think also what you just mentioned too relates to one of the questions in the chat. How do we relate SDG 5 Target 2 to eliminating violence against women and girls, to SDG 16 Target 1, reducing violence, protecting children from abuse and exploitation, leaning on that role of fatherhood. It really can connect, and presumably most fathers don't want to see their daughters harmed. So how do you kind of rely on that and demonstrate what the world could be for their daughters if we create more stable and secure institutions and societies? So appreciate that. Mojisola, over to you. I can come back to you if that works. I'll go to Isabella. Thanks.
Yeah, so no, I think that it's very important to bring men to the conversation. So first of all, that so bring them to the gender issues conversation. So it is not associated only like a woman's problem, but we have realized we have to be very strategic. So for instance, in the process that we've been doing with the Research to Action Collaborative Network, we have been trying to identify which is the path we have to travel with men. So for instance, first of all, we have been trying to identify where do we find men, first of all, like for instance, to talk about fatherhood and about how to involve men in care responsibilities, and in taking care not only of children, of their kids, but also having a different kind of relationships with their partners, and also exercising different type of leadership and decision making, which also takes in consideration other voices. We have been looking for men in places where masculinization or so that socialization of masculine norms are played, and trying to go and look for them there, and try to involve them, like how does patriarchy norms affect them as well. Yes, and how is not only affecting or creating gender-based violence, but also creating a lot of situations that put on pressure and put on a lot of stress, and also involvement in toxic practices, in dynamics that are violent and that affect their bodies, their relationships. So we've been trying to identify in each context and in each culture, because we have a lot of translab culture identities in the country. How can we speak to men and bring them in the conversation, and so that they realize how all of this patriarchy affects them, and how can they, and also showing them how can these attitudes and behaviors can be changed. So in a way, how are the things going on right now with how they learn to be men, and how can they change those behaviors and those ways of relating with others, so that they can yeah, be having other ways to be a man in a way. So this has been very, very interesting, and I think we have to try to work more on this.
Thanks, Isabel. So, Isabel, I think that's so key. Lots of times it's the sort of norms that take place in communities and in homes are what are replicated to drive violence outside of the home, you know, within a country and with other countries and things like that. They replicate each other. So really critical work as well. Mojisola, over to you. You're muted. There you go.
Yeah, talking about male involvement, we have been doing a lot on intergenerational talk, especially with young people. And as we are pushing for progress every day to talk about gender equality, what we have observed is that there is still that misconception about the stereotype that gender equality is about women wants to be 50-50 with a man. And we have that obstacle there that, no, it's a competition. We won't give them the way. So we are now looking at conversations around men that it will come from them to decondition that cultural norm. It's something that is really, really embedded, and how we can uproot patriarchy to the last. And it's one of the hardest things about our job to do, especially in Nigeria, where you have more than 250 ethnic groups, and the diversity itself is a strength. But when it comes to making sure that you understand each cultural context, it's a difficult task and a complex one to even tackle. So we have been having conversation now where we want to make sure that what we are presenting to young people is for them to own their agency as men, and also strategically accept women in their leadership role, to institutionalize, to make sure that when they call men to a meeting, and when somebody observing that meeting that we are 20 here and just only one woman, a young woman among us, let them from their own, intuition or initiative said, no, we have to stop the meeting and call this woman strategically like that. So there's a conversation around that. And also, they have been encouraging themselves now to have things like an academy, men's academy, men academy, where they can talk about gender equality and remove all the misconceptions. And if it doesn't come from them, it is very difficult for us to have a way in for them. And most of the structures that is being, directed by government, National Youth Council in Nigeria, for example, it's like a pseudo political, structure that the government, oversee with them. When you see them during the elections of leaders, you see like 100 men and about maybe 2 women there. So we're strategically pushing young women there to even say, now you can sit at the table, or make sure you take your chair to the table to make sure that they don't use you as a menu on the table. So as we are talking to men, making sure that that conversation about intergeneration, that we're giving them the support of mentoring, we are also pushing for girls. But the setback where we are seeing now, new thing that is coming out is that young girls are still pushing back, that there's a space for them. But young men, young women are still pushing back that there's a space, but I'm not sure they want me there. So there's a lot of, emotional things, psychological things that are going on to make sure we can get to where we want to be. Thank you.
Thank you. So valuable. The issue of changing cultural and societal norms, it's a huge lift. It's really challenging. That's probably what makes SDG 5 and SDG 16 the most complex and challenging SDGs of all of them. So it is not for the faint of heart. But but it's also not a zero-sum game. I love that you mentioned about parity. It's just because there are more women at the table doesn't mean, we're excluding. It's including, it's bringing more perspectives in, and that's how we build a more sustainable peace. So we are at time. I want to be respectful of everyone's days. So I just want to say, I am hopeful. I'm more hopeful than when we started this conversation because of the incredible leaders we have here on this panel. Thank you so much, Minister Hira, Mojisola, Isabella, for all of your insights and all of your incredible work you're doing every day at all different levels of your context. We have so much more to learn from you. I wish we had more time. And thanks again to all my partners for coordinating this event and all of our wonderful participants. There was a really rich discussion going on in the chat, which we've been capturing. So thank you again. And I look forward to seeing you again soon as we take on this very tough work moving forward. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
You.